Hatem, it still doesn't show up.
Yeah, just refresh the page. It should be there. Yeah, so let's begin. Hi to everyone who's watching. Thank you so much for coming today for this workshop on project planning and management. Our host today is Akshay, as you can see on your YouTube live stream today. And before we start, we thought we'll get a few words from our professor in charge, that is Rajshekar sir, about PS Innovation Lab and what we do. Yeah, over to you, sir.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Nice that all of you have joined for this workshop during this pandemic. I would like to just give you a brief intro about the PES Innovation Lab, which we've been running in this campus for last over about 10 years now. So initially when we started, it was Nokia, Mobile Innovation Lab, and later it got rechristened as Microsoft Innovation Lab when Nokia was taken over by Microsoft. So after the Microsoft Innovation Lab had done a couple of internships and lots of activities in this campus, so we had to, due to various copyright and other issues, we had to remove the Microsoft word from the lab name, and we have now renamed it as PES Innovation Lab. Okay, so many of you who are seniors in this group watching, say probably the third and fourth year students, probably maybe knowing about the genesis of this changeover. But then due to certain reasons, we had to rename it as PES Innovation Lab, but we continue to do the good job what we have been doing earlier. Okay, so usually this lab, students would have been taken as interns after a thorough screening process. And the internship at Microsoft Innovation Lab or the PS Innovation Lab is a unique opportunity, and it's a unique experience as far as I know. So the 8 weeks, they spend within the campus during the summers and work on some contemporary state-of-the-art projects. And many of the project works got converted to prototypes, many of them converted to papers, publications, journals, in reputed conferences, and so on. And many of them have gone abroad and published their work. And many of our students, many of our interns, our senior alumni, the alumni of this lab, they've gone abroad and they've done their masters, and they still continue to patronize our effort in the campus in a very humble way. Okay, so this particular year, as you know, due to the pandemic, we have our hands are tied and we are unable to pursue what we wanted to do. Unfortunate, but yes, we want to do in our own way whatever activity we can pursue now. So in that step, our smart young interns and students who are in charge of the lab right now, they've taken a big step. A lot of initiative, a lot of proactive work has gone on from their side to start off this work with a couple of workshops which will be useful to all of you. I request all of you to kindly do participate in a very sincere way to learn as much as you can. And I'm sure that today's talk is going to be on, the first one is on the project management. Okay, as you know, whether or not you become a project manager in the near future, please be assured that the knowledge what you will gain today under the umbrella of project management, as perceived, as understood by our seniors, as understood by your own seniors and colleagues and peers, they will give you a bird's eye view of what is project management and various jargon associated with it. Okay, so in my opinion, I've been a project manager. I've come from industry and I've been a project manager in a software company and other than software system integration company also for the entire national level projects. See, as a project manager, there are lots of activities that are very specific to the project. Unlike any other person in the organization who does certain repeated tasks, a project management is entirely different. The P in the project management is more about, much more about the people rather than about the project itself. Like there are many quotes, you can see it in the Google and things like that. But the three important things associated with project management are time, scope, and cost. Okay, so time is the most important critical element in every project, and scope is the extent of work which we got to carry out. So when your mentors are going to talk about this, you may wonder what is the scope. The scope, is it restricted only to the software development or any other construction or any other work what even a government institution might do? So these three aspects, time, cost, and the scope, are the three important pillars. They are drawn like a triangle. So within a triangle, if any one of the sides is changed, the other two sides are bound to change, right? So the same with these three important critical aspects, you need to keep it in mind. Okay, so with this brief introduction, I hand over back to the team, which is going to start with the talk on project management. Please do give a patient hearing and reserve your questions to the end, and do practice. If there are many tools available in the internet as well as in many open sources, including MS Project, which is probably licensed. So you could practice some of them, so which will help you in a big way to understand project management in a systematic way. That's what is required in the industry, especially in the software industry. Thank you, and all the very best to all of you. Thank you very much. Over to Akshay.
Thank you, sir. All right. First up, big thanks to everyone who's joined us here today. I'm super excited to talk about project planning and management. But before I get on to that, big shout out to PES Innovation Lab for inviting me here to talk about this today. P Lab is a fantastic initiative, and they're a group of fantastic people, very intelligent people, super nice people. And you should definitely check out their website, and I think we'll be dropping a link in the live chat, and you guys should go and visit that after you're done listening to this workshop. Okay, so title slide: project planning and management, condensed and concentrated. Why does it say condensed and concentrated? I could have called it a gentle introduction to project planning and management. I could have called it project management for dummies, but no. It's not a gentle introduction at all. What I'm about to cover here in the next hour and a half is basically what is taught to most people in a course that lasts for about 8 to 10 hours. I've condensed it, and I'm bringing to you the most important points and exactly what you need to know at sort of this stage of your career, when you're getting started. Project planning and management is a very big subject. It's a complementary subject. It doesn't stand alone. You can't be a project manager and not know, your primary discipline. It's a complementary discipline. But it's a big subject in the sense that there's a lot of, rigorous methods to sort of do things like budgeting, like Sir said, scheduling, risk mitigation and management. We won't be going into those, very, very rigorous processes in today's workshop. But I will be giving you, like Sir said, the bird's eye view of project planning and management from start to finish. And my goal for today is that when you leave this workshop, when you close this link, you should be able to go open your resume and add project management as a skill. Now that is the goal here. This is not going to be, just a casual conversation that you can just, just listen to just like that. I think it'll really help you. It'll go a long way if you give me your undivided attention for the next hour and a half, and you actually completely understand every single thing I'm saying here, because it's honestly done wonders to get my own career started, and I hope that it'll do the same for you as well. So let's just get started. Okay, a little bit about who I am. I'm the co-founder of a budding startup. We're called Freeclan. What we do is we build solutions that make the lives of content creators and digital artists much more simple. Okay. I'm also a program manager at Encoastal Solutions, which is a startup based off in Bombay. I'm also the co-founder of JSOC, which is a community for web developers. Right. The big question: why learn project planning and management? Why does it matter for you? Right. The first thing I want to say is, when you're a student in college, right, you do a whole bunch of projects. You build an app for this, you build a command line tool, you do this, you do that, you write a simulation, whatever it is. You need to understand that all of these projects, 99% of these projects, they are nothing more than prototypes. Commercial enterprise grade products, not just software. It can be anything. It can be building a table. If you're a carpenter, it's building a table, right? So commercial grade products, they require a whole different strategy than just getting started with it. So you need to see how all the different pieces of the picture, how they fit in together, and that is something that project planning and management will help you be able to achieve. You need to learn the art of foresight. You can't just get started on a project and see where things go. That doesn't happen, because in real world projects, there's real money involved. There's other people involved who take their work very seriously. It really makes a difference. It's not just your tiny little project and two of your other friends, and if things don't go the way you intended they go, it's not like you can just scrap it, right? There's real rupees involved in all of this. You need to understand the importance of detail. So one of the most important things when it comes to project planning, let's forget about the management side of it, but one of the most important things when it comes to project planning is your attention to detail. Without even having an idea of what the end product is going to look like, you need to be able to conceptualize and sort of predict what exactly are the features I'm looking at here. How would I have to implement this? You need to break it down into as granular a piece as you need in order to predict things like cost, effort, and the amount of time taken. And that will help you schedule your project really well, and it will make executing a project, it'll make it a joke, honestly, because it'll be that simple. You need the ability to calculate, manage, and mitigate risks. Now, you can't always predict what's going to happen, right? Like, let's say you're a project manager at a construction firm and you guys are building a skyscraper, right? You can't almost never predict that there's going to be a natural disaster, right? Those are not risks that you can really mitigate, but that is a risk that you can manage, in the sense that you can build your skyscraper considering the fact that, depending on your geographic location, what kind of disasters that should it be able to withstand, or to what degree. So these are some things. You need to learn how to manage stakeholder expectations. Just like Rajshekhar sir said a few minutes ago, project planning is more about the people than the planning itself or the project itself, right? As a project manager, you're going to have a very, very people-facing role, in the sense that you need to interact with senior management on a regular basis. You need to interact with your team, and you definitely need to be able to interact with your potential customers, the people who are going to be the beneficiaries, or the sort of people who are going to pay to use your project or your product, which is the outcome of your project. And lastly, it's just super fun and easy, honestly. Project planning and management it just takes common sense, and it sort of rigorizes that, so that you don't go wrong anywhere, and you can execute a project as smoothly as possible. Right. Primary question: what is a project, right? If you want to plan and manage it, you better know what a project is in the first place, right? So there's this 4 different terms here that people will constantly confuse. You have a project, you have a program, you have a portfolio, and then you have an operation, right? So let's talk about the topic at hand, a project. A project is a temporary endeavor to create a unique solution, right? So I've highlighted 2 words in this sentence. The first is temporary and the second is unique, right? What I mean when I say temporary is that it's not repetitive, right? It's not like manufacturing. Manufacturing is something that you do on a regular basis. You do it day in, day out, right? You do it for hours at end and you keep repeating it, right? A factory keeps churning out products, right? That is not a project. That's an example of an operation. So manufacturing would be an operation. But designing the manufacturing process, or designing the product itself, or designing the packaging of the product, these are things that you essentially do one time, right? So this is an example of a project. Now, program and portfolio is similar to what a project is defined as, but a program is basically a collection of multiple projects. So remember when I said I'm a program manager? So I manage a bunch of projects under me. So a program is a collection of projects, and a portfolio is a collection of programs. And that's basically all there is to it. And if you understand this basic definition, going forward, everything is going to be very straightforward. Right. One more thing that people will often, not understand correctly is the difference between a project life cycle and a project management process. So what is a project life cycle? A project life cycle is a sequence of steps that is ultra customizable to your project requirements, your industry, and it's what helps you actually take the project from start to finish, right? So for example, a project life cycle for something in tech would be a standard SDLC, a software development life cycle. You have requirements gathering, then you start to prototype it a bit, you write code for it, you test it, you integrate it, and then you turn over, right? That's an example of something in tech. So that is a project life cycle, and a project life cycle is a tool that is very, very versatile, right? So if I'm a carpenter, then my project life cycle to build a table can be anything I deem fit to be the steps involved in that, right? So a project life cycle, remember, a project life cycle is very, very flexible to your particular needs and the needs of your industry as a whole, right? Now, what is a project management process? Right? A project management process is not so flexible. Depending on what project management framework your company uses or you use in your organization, a project management process is more or less fixed, right? So as you can see down here, there are a bunch of process groups. So I'll talk a little bit more about what these process groups are in the coming slides. But what you need to understand for now is that a project management process is something that is sort of more or less written in stone in terms that it includes things like initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and finally closing the project. So each of these would be your individual process groups, and you can take each of these process groups and you can fit them. So you would initiate step 1, you would plan step 1, you would execute step 1, and so on. You can do the same thing for step 2, step 3, step 4. Now this is what you need to understand to be the difference between a project life cycle and a project management process itself. Right. So this is something that is quite unique to project management as a subject. Theory versus practicality, right? There is a big difference. So you remember in the previous slide I showed you how you take you take this group of project management processes and you plug it into each step and you do all of those processes for each one of those steps. That rarely happens, right? That rarely happens. It happens in really big and complicated projects, But in most projects, even in most commercial projects, mid-level commercial projects, you would just have these process groups and you would fit them into your project life cycle as a whole, right? So you would initiate the project life cycle, you would plan the project life cycle, you would execute, you would monitor it, and then you would close it, right? So this is what I want to make a point here, that with project planning, there's no need to complicate it, there's no need to oversimplify it. Take as much of project planning and implement it in your work or in your life as you deem fit, because the point of project planning and management is to make your work easier, not to drown you in a bunch of documentation, right? But that being said, don't be lazy, right? Because every little piece of the puzzle that you solve before you start your execution is going to make your execution 10 times easier, right? So that's one thing that I really want to drive home, that theory and practicality are two different things, and you take the piece of the pie that you're interested in or that will help make your life easier, right? You don't have to use every single idea or technique that I'm going to talk about today, but you take the bits that make your life easier, right? What are the process groups that make up the project management process, right? Like I've been saying, you have initiation, then you plan the project, right? You think about okay, how much is it going to cost, when should I execute certain steps, who should I hire, right? These kind of things. Then the next two processes, they sort of run in parallel, right? They keep running in parallel. Execution and monitoring and control, they run in parallel. Once you're done executing and you have what you define as the end of your project, you would then perform a set of processes that help you sort of close things out, bring everything to a nice, systematic, logical conclusion, and just tie a ribbon around it, and that would be your closing process group, right? Now, before we go ahead, I don't want everyone to just listen. So I'm going to ask the moderators to send a link in the live chat, and it's just a really small quiz that would be fantastic if you can take right now. And once the link comes out, you'll have like 5 to 7 minutes to solve it. It's just 5 questions, and it's purely based on what I've spoken about right now. Yep, the link's out. So please take that quiz. It's going to help you understand whether you've gotten the basics of it, because without this, the rest of my presentation is not really going to add up to you, right? If you've heard this, if you've understood this, then everything from here on is going to be incremental, right? So please take that quiz, and we'll discuss your answers and everything you wrote in about, say, 5 minutes time. So the time is 11:24 now, and I think at 11:29 we'll come back and we will talk about this. Or if a majority of you finish before that, then we'll just start earlier. We'll just wait for 3 more minutes and we hopefully have all our responses in. Okay, an average score of about 25 so far. That's great. Great start. We'll just wait for another minute and we will continue. Okay, then let's get back into it. So, all right, you guys got an average of about 25 points. That's great. Okay, let's look at your responses. Okay. Okay. Right. So most of you got this one right. So which of the following is true? Right. It's temporary and it produces a unique outcome. If you didn't get that right, then let me just repeat it for you. A project has to be temporary. It has to have a fixed window of time in which you execute, and it has to have a unique deliverable. Right. Okay. Which of the following is the largest set? Awesome. Most of you got that right. It's a portfolio. What is more flexible to your requirements? Yes, it's a project life cycle. And for the 11 people who said project management process, it's not, because a project management process is sort of defined by the framework that you're using. And the framework that I'm going to teach you today, I've already showed you the project management process groups. You have initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and closing, right? So that is fixed. So that is not flexible. Okay. Which of the right? Which two process groups run in parallel? Execution. Awesome. Yeah. So planning and execution does not happen in parallel. Planning and monitoring and control, no. Yeah. The right answer is execution and monitoring and control, right? Because as you're actually executing, as your team is working, that's when you need to go and look at them and say, okay, you're doing this right. Do this now. Okay, this is wrong. We need to sort of rework this, right? You need to monitor and control only when people are actually executing. What are you going to monitor and control when your management team is sitting and planning. There's nothing to do there. So the only two things that can possibly run in parallel and actually do run in parallel are execution and monitoring and control. Right? Right. The most important question. Do you like The Office? Yes. To the 8 people who said no, you should watch The Office. It's pretty good. Okay. Back to our sort of workshop. Okay. Right. Quick recap. You know what a project is. You know the difference between a project, a program, a portfolio, and an operation. You know what a project life cycle is. You know the difference between a project life cycle and a project management process. And you now know that theory can be one thing, but practicality is a whole other. And although it provide a framework is good, what you do in practicality should be a subset. It should be derivative of what you've learned in theory. But it's okay if it's not the case. Some projects are just very different from other projects, and it's okay if you need to make a few detours, right? That's fine. And you now know what process groups are, and you know which process groups form the project management process, right? Initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control. Now these two, they run in parallel. And finally, closing, right? Okay, let's start off with the first process group, initiation. Now, your initiation process group has one deliverable, just one deliverable. That is to come out with a document called the project charter, right? What does the project charter contain? It contains the business case, right? What's the business case? The business case is where you make an argument as to why it makes sense to actually go ahead and execute this project. You have to tell senior management numbers. You have to quantify the benefits. You have to say things like, this is going to increase our profit by 2%, or it's going to increase revenue by 5%, or this is going to improve our brand perception. Something. You have to quantify it and you have to tell them why it makes business sense to execute this project. Because remember, these are not hobby projects, right? You're in an organization, and an organization's goal is to make money. So everything you do is driven by the business case and whether it makes business sense or not. The next thing you want to talk about is the project objective. This is where you don't go into a lot of detail, because remember, this is just initiation, right? The next step is planning. Here, you just very broadly define what the objective of the project is. Like I said, if you're a carpenter, you say, I want to build a table, and this is what is different about my table. Maybe a line or two, right? Then major deliverables. So if I'm building a table, my major deliverables would be 1, the table; 2, maybe some sort of a user manual if it's a very complicated table, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Like it's a table, right? Roles and responsibilities. This is super important. So this is where you sort of think a bit ahead, and you say, right, so what do I need? What kind of roles are involved in this? So obviously, one, you have the carpenter. Then you need a marketing team to come up with like a brochure for the table. You need sales guys to actually make people purchase the product, and you probably need an HR team to manage this. You might need a finance guy to handle your numbers for you if it's a very big organization, right? So roles and responsibilities, you have to think about this at this stage. Now, stakeholders are, think about every single person that is affected by you building or not building this table, right? Every single person. So stakeholders in this case would be yourself, the project manager, senior management, because the board members maybe, and the carpenters, any other workers, woodworkers, people who do the polishing, the sales guys, the marketing guys, the finance guys, and most importantly, the most important stakeholder apart from your own team is the customer, right? That it's that person who makes or breaks your project, or at least the product that is, the outcome of your project. So don't ever forget to include your customer as a stakeholder, because that is a sign of something really wrong with your project management ideology, your methodology, because if you forget to talk about the one person who makes the biggest difference as a stakeholder, then something's off, something's not right here. Okay, the last thing you want to talk about are the assumptions you're making. So in my example, right, I'm assuming that I will get raw wood at a reasonable price, right? There's a possibility that there's going to be some sort of a market fluctuation when I actually start my execution, and the price of, let's say, teak wood or maple wood is going to shoot up by 10-20%, and that is something that I can't afford, right? As an organization, as a for-profit organization, I can't afford that. So an assumption I'm making is that prices are going to remain somewhat, predictable and stable. And another assumption I'm making is that there is a sufficient amount of people who are willing to distribute me that wood at that price, right? So these are some examples of assumptions. Okay. Now I understand how boring my table carpenter example was. So let's take a slightly more fun example. And to everyone who said you liked The Office, this is your lucky day. Right. So congratulations, you're Michael Scott, and you just got assigned to lead a project at Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. So for those of you who haven't watched The Office, Dunder Mifflin is basically it's a company that manufactures paper, and the protagonist of this sitcom, if you can call him a protagonist, his name is Michael Scott, and he's the manager of a branch of that company. So for the rest of this workshop, let's take our example case, our use case, to be the fact that we have to come up with some sort of solution for Dunder Mifflin, right? And let's pretend that you're the project manager, right? So you can see his boss is saying to him that they want him to lead an effort to rebrand some of their premium offerings. So this is an example of where sort of corporate starts off the whole process of coming up with a project. But I do want to make a very serious point here. So far, most of the projects that I have worked with, in a serious environment, it's ones that I have taken to my higher ups, and I've told them, listen, I have a plan, I have a project charter. Do you want to do this? And I cannot stress enough about the number of opportunities that opens up for you, right? So okay, let's get into it, right? Right. So first off, making the project charter. Like I said, in the business case, Michael says that their branding was last designed in 1985, so it's obviously very outdated. A rebranding would put them back in the competition and increase sales by 37%. I hope Michael's done his research, because these numbers you can't just pull out of the air. You have to do some survey, you have to do some sort of market research and then come to it, because you'll have to sort of explain to management why you came up with this and why it makes sense. The project objective is to reinvent the brand perception and redesign branding schemes which could potentially elevate sales. And under major deliverables, he says three things. One is the branding document, right, which sort of describes not just how you want the brand perception to be right now for one particular product, but going forward, if you come up with a completely new line of products, how do you derive from what you have found today, right? So a branding document is sort of a guide that your company's branding and marketing team will use for the foreseeable future, and they will use that as a tool, as sort of compass to decide how to go about branding your products, right? A new logo is the second thing that he wants to deliver, and third is a very, very tangible deliverable of new package designs for all of their premium products, right? Because that's what Jan wanted. Roles and responsibilities. So it makes sense to assume that you would need a design lead, you'd need a market researcher, you'd need design interns, and a whole bunch of people, and I leave that to the ellipsis for you to sort of think about. Stakeholders, as I said, first priority, consumers, senior management, designers, salesmen, it goes on. Assumptions is that interns will be cost effective, right? No one can predict, like, if your country comes out with new labor laws that say that paying interns on a different salary scale from paying full-time employees is not acceptable, then you have a problem, right? Because your project's validity in terms of profitability is solely based on your cost, right? At least to a great extent. So you need to make this assumption very clear that you're assuming that interns are going to be cost effective. You're also assuming that your salespeople, the people who are calling up people and saying, hey, do you want to buy our paper? You're also assuming that these people are going to be okay with a change of script, a change of story. Like, you have to realize, right, when you're coming out with a project that's going to change something that's already there, there are people who have been used to doing things a certain way for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And change is not always welcome. So one assumption you're making right now, at least at this stage, is that the salesmen are going to be open to new material, right? Obviously, later on when you're doing a project planning or taking this to the next step, right, you can go and talk to actual employees and ask them, does this make sense to you? Right? Because if you design something that no one wants to use, then what is the point, right? So that's an assumption that he's making. I hope you asked this question to yourself. I hope you asked yourself, why make a project charter? It's so high level. It lacks detail. Why bother? Like, look at this project charter. It fits on one single slide. Like, how can this be useful in any sort of imaginable way? The answer is very clear. First, it serves as a checkpoint or a sign-off from management. So, your company, your organization is paying you for every single hour of work you do, right? Day in, day out. So, you need to ask them, hey, here's an idea of what I want to accomplish and how I want to accomplish it. Are you okay with me spending more time and actually engaging myself and possibly engaging a lot of our other employees in this activity? Are you okay with it? Right? So it's a checkpoint. 2. Initiation is the simplest process group of all the 5. You remember I spoke about initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and conclusion, closing. So initiation is the simplest. So it's better that if management is going to say, no, this idea is really dumb, or we just don't have the budget for it right now, or I don't like you, don't do this project. It's really good if you get cancelled after doing the least amount of work, right? Because project planning, which is the next process group that's coming up, that is fairly complicated. It takes a lot of effort, and I think it's just going to be really sad if you get cancelled at that point in time, right? So that's why you need a project charter, right? The second process group is project planning, right? So when you try to plan a project, you want to ask yourself 3 primary questions, right? And everything you write after this is just an answer to these 3 questions, right? Albeit under various terms, but they're all just answers to these 3 questions. The first question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And how to know when the project is done? Okay. When you look at this, I think it's fair to say most of you would assume that the first 2 questions are sort of the more dominant ones and the more important ones. I can't stress enough about how important the last one is. Most projects, because they have weak project managers or weak project management strategies, they never end. They get indefinitely continued, and you just keep on going. People keep increasing the scope of your project, and you just keep on building, right? That is when you know you've failed as a project manager, because you need to have a set of criteria that clearly says, okay, I've achieved this, I'm done, I'm closing this project. If you need anything else, that's a story for the future, right? This project, what we set out to do 3 months ago, is now done, right? So knowing when your project is done is super important, right? So planning consists of 6, why did I do this? I don't know. 6 different steps, right? The first is collecting requirements, defining scope, a work breakdown structure. I mean, that should sort of be obvious what that would mean, but I will explain it in great detail. A work breakdown structure dictionary, which is sort of a supplemental document for the work breakdown structure itself. A schedule, no brainer there, and sort of a budgeting document, right, to figure out where your expenses are and whether it makes sense to actually do this. So let's talk about the first step, requirements gathering, right? There's this guy called Dennis Sassal, and he is a former consultant at PwC, extremely well-spoken, talented guy, and he has, I think, about 20 years of consultancy experience under his belt. And he says this, he says, collecting requirements is easy, but retaining your sanity is hard. And the reason for this is, when you collect requirements, what do? You go and you talk to, you remember we listed down different stakeholders a few steps ago? You go and talk to each one of them, right? You go and ask them, this is the project, what are your requirements from me in this regard? Now, this is going to sound funny, but people have all sorts of weird requirements, like in my carpenter example, imagine I went to my marketing guys, my sales guys, and I told them, I'm making a table, what are your requirements? Now, if it's up to the sales guy, he would want a table that is diamond studded and like has, I don't know, crocodile skin on it, just the fanciest stuff, because that would sort of make his life easier in terms of making a sale, right? So people's requirements are going to be extremely vested in their own interests. You need to understand that as a project manager. And the reason why he says retaining your sanity is hard is because everybody is going to want something of their own, and requirements will clash. Just like when your sales guy asked for that diamond studded table, your finance guys are going to say, listen, it's not possible, make it as cheap as possible. That is the most obvious conflict right there, right? So requirements will clash, and that is why you need to be firm, gentle but firm as a project manager in terms of sort of learning to say no, right? Learning to say no is very important, right? So the next step in the planning process group is the scope statement, right? So this is where things get a little more detailed. A scope statement should contain a project justification. Now, justification in terms of why the labor is justified, why the time is justified, why the cost is justified, why it makes monetary sense to actually execute this project. A scope. What's a scope, right? It's really simple. A scope is a subset of the requirements that you gathered. So you take the requirements that everybody asked for, chuck out the ones that don't really apply to your project, the ones that are not possible, the ones that don't make sense, or for any other reason that is a valid reason to eject them off that list, and that you get a scope. So if you're ever confused between requirements and scope, the definition of these two things, just remember that a scope, much like in the case of a gun or a telescope, a scope, it narrows down on what you want to see, on what you want to focus on, and that is why it's called a scope, right? So you take your project requirements, you eject all of the guys that don't make sense on there, and you have your scope, right? Project deliverables, it has to be a list of things. It can't be a list of actions, right? So in my project deliverable, saying something like, 20 hours of workmanship on the table, that doesn't make sense. That's an action, right? You have to say something like highly durable table that can take a blunt force of so much, right? Example. So a project deliverables list has to be very, very crisp. It has to be concise, and it has to include every single thing that you intend to deliver, right? A project success criteria, like I said, is absolutely essential, because without this, you have no way of saying whether your project is going well at the moment, and you also have no way of saying whether your project is going to end at all, right? So let's look at an example. So this is what Michael's scope statement would look like. So he's saying there's a revenue increase of 37%. All right. Scope, like I said, I don't want to get into the details of it in this particular case, but you would take the requirements gathered and you would remove a subset of that. That doesn't make sense. I mean, if you have fantastic employees and stakeholders who are very understanding of the project, then X is going to be a null set, perfectly fine, but that's never the case, right? Project deliverables, a branding document, a new logo, new package designs for all products. So you need to elaborate on all of these things greatly, because we already said that we're going to give them the project document, a new logo and new package designs in our initiation phase, in our project charter itself, right? So what's the point of writing it again here? No. You need to go into great detail about exactly what the branding document is going to contain. It's going to contain information about things like what colors our brochure should use, what tones it should use, what sort of graphic schemes it should use, what are the typefaces that you want on it. You know, like I'm not a design person, but some of the things that you need to think about. In terms of a new logo, you need to sort of very clearly define, are there a whole different bunch of logos, like maybe your stores have a different sort of logo, your paper packages have a different version of the same logo. You need to define clearly what you want to deliver. New package designs for all projects, same thing. Just be very clear about what you're going to give back to your company when you turn the project back over to them and it's completed, right? Okay, project success criteria. This is something that a lot of project managers do very differently. Like it's up to them, but I like to do it in a sort of tabular form, because I find that to be the most logical way to assemble this data together. So you have a criteria name, you have a description of it. So for example, like criteria name here in this paper example would be, in terms of the branding document, would be let's say timely completion. Timely step completion is one criteria. The description for that would be, you check intermittently, periodically you check whether a given amount of X work has been completed on the branding document. The type here, what I mean by type is you want to mention whether this is a it's a qualitative sort of thing or it's quantitative. If it's quantitative, you want to say whether it's a continuous measure or it's a discrete measure. So in this case, I guess it makes sense to say it's a continuous measure because we're talking about percentages, right? And the frequency is how often you're going to test this criteria, right? So in this case, I say I want to test it every 3 days. Every 3 days, I want to go to my design lead and I want to ask him how much of it is done, right? So it's these kind of criteria that help us sort of see whether we're on track. Are we on our way to a successful project completion? Because that is the goal. It's always the goal. So that is an example of, you know, a frequently tested criteria. You can also have a criteria which are final, right? So that would be sort of project completion criteria, where you can say that, okay, I'm going to measure this at the end of 3 months, and if it checks all of these boxes, we're done. The project has been completed and we're good to go, right? The goal has been achieved, right? The next bit of the next project group is planning, and this one's called the work breakdown structure. So a work breakdown structure basically consists of work packages. It's nothing. A work package is simply a smaller chunk of the list of deliverables that you have, such that this chunk is, you know, you can easily evaluate the amount of time it will take to complete this chunk of work, such that you can easily evaluate the cost to complete this chunk of work, right? So you can bring down the granularity to whatever level you need, so that you can easily estimate two things: time and cost. Simple. And these work packages are then organized in sort of a tree-like structure, so that, you know, you can sort of figure out exactly what are the different tasks. You can categorize them into various verticals, right? I'll show you an example. So this is our example here. So here you see there are 3 main prongs, right? You have market research, you have design, and you have market testing. So yeah, under market research, he said you need to carry out a competitor study, and under competitor study, you want to study a competitor A first, Then you want to look at a competitor B next. Then you have a brand study. You have you have another thing called user research, right? It doesn't matter what those things are right now for our example, but you need to bring it down to the level of granularity that you need in order to estimate correctly two things: time and cost. Then under design, you have a whole bunch of things: a vision document, a branding guideline, the actual design for product A, the actual design for product B, right? Under market testing, you have design unit tests. So you test each of these individual design pieces with a consumer, and design package test is somewhere, I'm guessing, where you would take the entire suite of your work and present it and get feedback on that, right? And so the first, I'm sorry I didn't explain this, but the first cell you see right at the top here, that is your project ID or your project code, right? Every organization has tens, if not hundreds, of projects running parallelly. So you need a way to sort of identify a project without having to say, oh yes, that project which Akshay is running, yeah, Akshay who sits in the second floor, right? You don't want to say that. So you can just follow whatever sort of guideline your organization uses. I'm calling this DMPC RB 2021, and that is Dunder Mifflin Paper Company Rebranding 2021, right? So that's usually how it's done, right? Okay, now what is a WBS dictionary? WBS dictionary, it's a supplemental document, like I said. It's a supplemental document for your work breakdown structure, and it helps you to define each task with exceptional clarity. Now, why do you need to define each task with exceptional clarity? It has only one purpose. It's to prevent scope creep, right? So scope creep is when the scope of your project, right, what you want to accomplish, you keep on indefinitely extending it. You say, okay, fine, you want a table, cool. Then someone will say, I want a chair also. Someone will say, give me a sofa as well. No, you can't do that. Those are two different projects, right? Go talk to somebody else. I am building a table, and that is my scope that's been defined, right? So you use a WBS dictionary so that if someone comes and asks you for a chair, right, you can say, look at my WBS dictionary, right? There's no place in that to sit and work on a chair. It's not going to be possible, and that's sort of a very polite way to ask them to not come back to you with silly requirements like that again. And that's an important skill. So Michael's WBS dictionary would basically be a table with each row containing a clear definition for each of these tasks, right? For competitor study A, B, for brand research, user research, each of these would be a separate row in that table, and he'd sort of define exactly what that work package consists of, what deliverables it consists of, so that you don't overrun your scope, right? Scope creep is the worst possible thing that can happen to a project, and you must protect your project against scope creep at all costs. With that being said, some scope requirements, some scope additions are actually justified. So for example, in my table example, if someone came up to me and said, listen, I think you need to make the corners of your table more rounded because this is not compliant with what is child safe or baby proof, right? Now that makes sense. That really makes sense, because our goal is to design a good table, right? And if someone comes up with an idea that doesn't take a whole lot of effort but takes us much closer towards achieving our goal, that's a win. So in such cases, you can accept changes in scope, but there are different processes that you need to follow for that, and we won't really be diving into that right now. So for now, avoid scope creep. Right, scheduling. Scheduling has just 3 steps. The first thing you want to do is you want to estimate the time taken for each and every step. Each and every step, you say, okay, designing the first 10 pages of my branding document. I'm saying the first 10 pages because I have no idea what it should contain, but the first 10 pages is going to take me 2 days. The next 15 pages is going to take me 5 days. You say this very clearly, you define it, you sequence it sensibly, right? What I mean by sequence it sensibly is you can't test before actually building. You can't build before planning. And it makes no sense to plan after the project is complete, right? So sequence your steps in an order that actually makes sense for you. It's going to make your life easier. Now, sequencing is not always very obvious, right? There are a whole different bunch of ways in which you can sequence your steps so as to two things: bring down cost, one, and second is maximally utilize your human resources, right? And there are a whole other bunch of constraints that I need to consider. Like, for example, if I'm building this table, and if you don't really get high quality raw wood in one particular season, then don't keep your execution stage in those months, right? Push the whole project ahead, or finish up your planning and your initiation and some other sort of branding sort of steps in those months, and start executing when you need to, when you can, right? So in that sense, sequence it sensibly, and I leave the definition of sensible up to you, depending on your particular use case and your industry's own constraints, right? And the last bit is just put it on a Gantt chart, right? It's very easy to understand, and it serves as a roadmap for you to decide when to do what, and it's a great indicator of where you're headed. So this is an example of what Michael's proposed schedule would look like. So he's saying week 1 and week 2 we'll do competitor A study, week 2 we'll do competitors B study. If you notice here, he's doing user research and the brand study parallelly. Maybe that's because they're done by two different teams of people, so it makes sense to sort of do them parallelly. Then you do a vision document that lasts for just half a week. Then he designs the brand guidelines and so on, right, up to the actual design and testing itself. So in the span of 8 weeks, in the span of 2 months, he's done. He's done with the entire project, and he's done scheduling it as well, right? Okay. Two very important things. I want you to listen to this very, very carefully. So these are two pieces of jargon that you're going to hear in an organization, especially if you're in a project management role. There's two things. One is fast tracking and the other is crashing, right? They sort of accomplish the same thing, but they're two very different strategies, right? In fast tracking, what you do is you perform more activities in parallel, right? So in this example, where he's done user research and brand study parallelly, that's an example of fast tracking, right? You're doing multiple activities in parallel because maybe they're done by different groups altogether, right? The next thing is called crashing. So crashing is where you reduce the duration of each individual activity by pouring as much resource as you need at it, right? So each of these individual, this red, this blue, this green process, instead of doing it parallelly, you're actually crashing each one of them. You're squishing each one of them into a smaller piece of time by allocating more people, more money to them in order so that they can be accomplished in a shorter period of time, right? Both of these things, they accomplish the same end goal. That is the fact that you're completing your goals in a shorter period of time, but they're two very different strategies, and which one of the two is applicable to you, that only you can decide on the basis of your own constraints, right? The next part of our planning process group is budgeting. Budgeting is one of the more serious bits of project planning and management, and it's one of the most rigorous ones in terms of having actual formulae and equations and standard practices that you should ideally follow. But to be honest, in small to medium projects, you don't need all that hi-fi stuff, right? It's very simple. You need to estimate your costs for each work package. You remember the work packages we spoke about in our work breakdown structure. Estimate your costs for each of these individual work packages and add them. You get a number. Now take a certain percentage of a contingency reserve and add it back to this amount. That's it. That's your budget, right? And usually that number is somewhere around the 20% mark. But once again, right, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by saying 20% is the number, right? It depends on your condition. It depends on your case. It depends on the budget that your overall organization has. And if your project is really, really big, if it's complex, then this method is not recommended. There are formal, rigorous methods that you need to sort of apply in order to get to a very formal budget, right? So, but without actually going into the mathematics of all of that, I want to give you a few tips that will really help you in your budgeting process. The first, use historical data. If one of the work packages that I'm thinking about is an intern designing a footer for all of my designs, right? In that case, do I really need to look at call prospective interns and ask them what sort of salary they're expecting? I don't. All I need to do is look at historical data, and that will give me all of the numbers that I'm interested in finding out. It'll tell me how much we've paid interns in the past, and it'll also help me sort of extrapolate from that. Have times changed? Was the last time we had an intern 20 years back? If yes, then it's probably not much use, but if it was something like 2 years back, then you can still extrapolate to present market conditions and sort of predict how much it's going to cost you, right? The next thing you want to do is leverage your experts. So it's very important to identify which one of your stakeholders can help you identify and sort of fix what budget. Maybe your senior management guy is an MBA in marketing, so maybe he can sort of help you estimate what the marketing costs are going to be. Maybe there's someone who's great with actual procurement. Maybe they can help you estimate how much the raw material is going to cost, right? So as a project manager, you're not really an expert in any of these fields, right? You're a jack of all trades, but it's important that you realize that and that you actually go and reach out to these individual people. The next thing is you want to keep updating and checking your budget in real time. Every single week or every single month or whatever period it makes sense in your case, you need to go and you need to look at a project and you need to say, are we staying within our budget, and have we made use of the money spent so far? When I say made use of the money spent so far, I just want to introduce one term here. I won't be going into the depths of it, but it's called an earned value, right? What's an earned value? If I'm 20% through with my project execution, then have I only spent 20% or lesser of my budget, right? It doesn't have to be linear this way. Most projects go like this, right? You accomplish a lot more towards the final stages. And honestly, in some projects, it doesn't even make sense to calculate the earned value in sort of periodic intervals like this, right? Because in the case of a table, right, if I build just the legs, and let's say in terms of volume, that is 80% of my table, right? Does it make sense to I've earned 80% of the amount I've sort of put into the project so far? It doesn't make sense. But earned value calculations make a lot of sense in two particular industries. The first is software development, where you can clearly say, I have 4 out of 20 modules ready, right? It makes sense. And secondly, in construction, right? Floor on floor on floor on floor, right? Or in stages, like have I finished plastering, or have I painted it, like that. So keep updating and checking your budget in real time. That's important. Alright, it's time for our second quiz, and the rest of the workshop is super simple. Honestly, we're almost done with what I had to tell you, but this is one last quiz for you, and I think this score will tell you a lot about how much exactly you have understood in our session so far, right? So please do take it right now. We'll wait for about 7 minutes on this as well. So the time is 12:10 now. I will wait till 12:17 or until most of you have completed the quiz, and we'll discuss some of your answers and we'll take it from there. 23 responses so far. Okay. Let's wait for 2 more minutes and we will get back to it. Okay, then let's start. So yeah, this one mostly got right. Okay. The project charter is the deliverable for the initiation process. I added project requirements as an option because I knew it's something that like people get confused with. So remember, a project requirements document is something that you do much later. You do it in the planning phase of it, right? So a project charter is what you actually take. Remember, project charter is the checkpoint that you go and verify whether it's okay to continue doing this project or not with your senior management. So a project charter is a deliverable of initiation, not the requirements document. Okay. What is the first step of project planning? Requirements collection, scope definition. No, it's not scope definition, it's requirements collection. Because remember, scope definition is a subset of the requirements. So how can you have a subset of something if you don't have the associated superset? It's not possible, right? So you do requirements collection first and then you define the scope. Okay. What is the optimal representation of a project schedule? Right? Glad you said it's a Gantt chart. Someone said pie chart. Nice joke. But yes, it's a Gantt chart. Shortening individual activities by higher resource allocation is called. Yes, it's crashing. Remember, fast tracking is when you parallelize things. Crashing is when you squish something into a smaller time frame by giving it more resources. Okay. Which of the following is not present in a project charter? Okay, not a lot of people got this right, but yeah, it is budget and no, it's not that. Wow, a lot of answers for this one. Okay. Yeah, the budget and scheduling is not present in the project charter because it's just a preliminary document, right? You haven't even thought about the numbers yet. You haven't thought about when you're going to carry out what task at all. So you can forget about budget and scheduling. It's not present in the project charter. Okay. The next question. What is scope creep? Scope creep is the process of unnecessary and uncontrolled growth in the project scope. That's right. The initial defined scope is never completed and the project extends indefinitely. If the initially defined scope is not completed and there's no additions to it, but still your project doesn't complete, I think that is poor management and it's not scope creep, right? Because you can be a great manager, but if you keep increasing the scope, that's when it becomes impossible to complete something. If you have a reasonable set of goals, a fixed reasonable set of goals, which is the scope, and you still don't finish, either they weren't reasonable or it wasn't a fixed set. There's only two possible scenarios there. A scope creep is a person with an unnatural and unnerving obsession with the scope of a project. 3 responses. Nice. Okay, that's awesome. I think the average score on this one was about 30 out of 40. Great. Oh, that's amazing. Someone's got 11 people have scored a 40. That's awesome. Okay, cool. Right. Let's just wrap things up. I don't have a lot more to say. I do have a few more things. We'll wrap up and then we can sort of interact a bit on the live chat and yep. Okay. This is the next process group. It's called execution. Take a look at your slide. Basically, I'm saying if the quality of your planning, which is the process group before this, if that is of a high standard and a high quality, execution, even though it lasts the longest period of time, you plan for maybe a few weeks, you execute for months, right? Even though it is the longest lasting process group, it's the easiest. If your planning was good, all you have to do is sit around at work and say, do this, do that. Okay, good job. No, rework this. That's it as a project manager. But if your planning was poor, like Michael Scott says, this is the worst, right? If you don't plan well, your execution is going to be absolute hell. And I hope you all have really heard this, right? If you don't plan well, it's going to be very difficult or nearly impossible to execute. So the previous process group we discussed, planning, is the most important process group in all of project management. So do that well and you're set for the next so many months that your project is going to run, right? Execution involves just two things, literally just two things. One is managing stakeholders. Like I said, your boss is going to write your mail and say, where are we at? You send him a mail regarding the progress report so far. You'll have someone coming up to you with a question. You say, do you really want it to be like that? Do you want it to be like this? You answer their question. That's managing stakeholders. Protecting your project against scope creep. I've already spoken in great detail about this. So that's one more thing you need to do during execution, because it is during execution when things become real, right? In the planning phase, you talk to your engineers, they'll be like, yeah, we can definitely write a program that is going to accomplish that, it's going to accomplish that, it's going to take your laptop to the moon, whatever it is. But it is an execution stage that people realize their true abilities, if I may say so. So that is when people will come to you and ask you to change the scope. So this is your job. Manage stakeholders, manage scope. That's it during execution. Okay. Monitoring and control is the next process group. So what you need to do here is you need to conduct periodic checks. You know, like as an organism, as a person, you need to go and get tested ever so regularly, and you need to make sure everything's going on right? So just like that, your project is a living, breathing thing, right? You need to go and check periodically if you're under budget, or at least on par with the predicted budget, if people are working efficiently, if the quality of the product is good, right? You need to check these things. Once you check that, right, you can do two more things. The first is preventive action, right? Preventive action is basically I see that we have a certain metric, right, in our success criteria. It says that the quality that is of the quality of my table as reported by customers or potential customers or my test subjects or my test group should be at least 4.5 stars out of 5 stars, right? Now, if the present rating is not there, right? If it's only 4.1 stars, that means I'm very close to failure. I'm very close to falling below the threshold, right? So that is when you need to sort of predict that things are not going the right way, and I really need to make some changes to drive the project back into the required direction. So that is damage prevention, right? Taking corrective action is once it falls below 4.5 stars, and then okay, listen, my prevention strategies haven't worked, and it's time for something a little more drastic now, right? And that I'll leave it to you to infer what that is. But these are two more things you need to do. One is preventive, one is corrective. But it's best that your preventive list is long and your corrective list is short. It's best if both these lists are short and your project goes perfectly fine, but that never happens, right? Okay. The last process group, it is super simple. It's closing. So if your project is for a client, let's say you work at a company that builds software for third-party clients, then turnover is something you have to do where you need to go to the client and say, hey, this is what we've built, and you need to probably demo it to them. You need to train their staff, their employees to use your software, right? So that would be turnover. You need to document your learnings, right? What are the lessons? What is if the project is a story, this final documentation is the moral, right? You need to take away a moral from this project, or else you're never going to grow as a project manager, and people who subsequently work with the product, the outcome of your project, right, they will not know sort of the whole story, right? So you need to document very clearly how the experience was. You need to sort of write manuals if needed. You need to explain basically everything. So if in the future somebody wants to continue this project and you're no longer with the company, there has to be an opportunity for a knowledge transfer to take place from the document to this person. It shouldn't be like they have to call you up and say, hey Akshay, can you come and talk to our new manager because he's a little clueless. So your documentation has to be so solid that it should be self-explanatory. You should not be needed after closing the project, right? Okay. The next thing is a review where you go and talk to all the stakeholders and assess how the entire experience was, right? And these assessments can once again go back into your documentation. You can say, this we did really well, but this we messed up a little bit, but we know why now. Now we know why. Next time it won't happen again, right? And that is pivotal, and that is just exceptional project management, and that will completely change the outcomes that you face, right? And the last step is you're done. Celebrate, right? Closing a corporate project is not a joke, and managing a corporate project is not a joke. So if you've successfully come to the stage and your stakeholders are happy, you protected your scope creep, and your project reached its completion after satisfying your project completion criteria, you've won, right? So celebrate, you deserve it. Okay. Now we will take any questions you may have. So please use the live chat to sort of ask me anything you want to ask me, and yeah, we'll take it from there. Remember guys, if anything that I said didn't make sense to you, or you think there's a better way of doing it, or anything of that sort, just drop a chat and I'll be happy to answer it. I think I'll wait for a few more seconds. If there are no questions, I'll proceed. Okay then, just want to make a couple of closing remarks. Oh, someone asked a question. Should we do a certification? Okay. Great question. The answer is it depends. Okay, so let me answer this question in detail. The first thing is, as a fresher, is what all of us are basically. It doesn't really make sense to do a certification because that certificate only holds any weight if you have actual industry experience to back it up, right? So for new and upcoming project managers, I don't think a certification really does much. And this is not my opinion because I too, like you, I'm a fresher. This is what I've been told by my superiors, and that's one thing. The second reason is something that's even more interesting. So remember how I told you that your strategy, your process groups will vary on which framework you decide to use, which project management framework you decide to use. The fact is, some organizations, some really high functioning organizations, some consulting groups, right? These guys have their own frameworks because their operations are so specialized, their projects are so specialized that it makes sense to use a customized framework. So if I go take an XYZ certification and I go tell them, it doesn't really add that much value. I mean, sure, you do have experience being a project manager, but the value there comes from your time being a project manager, not actually knowing some other framework, right? So doing a certification right now, I wouldn't recommend it, but get a few, I don't know, get some time of experience under your belt, and then figure it out. Yeah, talk to your employers and ask them, do you think that this will add value, and see what they say. And I think that's what matters the most, because when it comes to these sort of certifications, actually most certifications, and for that matter of fact, it's all about whether it's sellable, right? Whether someone wants to buy that. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper, right? So think about it. But that's my opinion. Okay. Rohan asks, how can we take the session further in practice? Awesome. So you can ideally do a course or two on Udemy or Coursera on project management. That would ideally be at least 10 hours minimum. So learn a little more rigor in project management. I've given you the foundation. Hopefully, I hope you've understood the basics right now, but you can go and build a lot more rigor on top of this, and I think that would be a great value add. But apart from the learning side of things, right, I've told you how to learn more. I want to tell you how to do more now. The next time an opportunity comes by or you have an idea, don't just start working on it, right? Plan it first. Think about it. I'll give you my own personal experience. So I have written to random startup founders and I've told them, hey, listen, I have an idea for a project that would do great things for you. Do you want to chat about it? And I've sent them a project charter, right? I've gotten callbacks and I've spoken to these people and I've even worked with some of them. So what I'm trying to say is, planning holds a lot more water than simply saying, hire me, I'm an employee. If you take a project charter to them, that is something that I think every employer is going to be immensely impressed by, because not only does it show that you know your tech, because yeah, you're from PES and you have an above average GPA, yeah, you can code, like, no doubt about it. But if you're someone who sees the big picture, then you're someone who can potentially do bigger things for them, and that is one more way you can take it forward, Rohan. Okay. Tanishk asks, what is the most essential skill according to you when it comes to project management? Okay, I think the most essential skill when it comes to project management is being systematic, right? Most people are all over the place, right? You have all big ideas, but you need to take that idea, break it down, and put the pieces back together in a way that really makes sense. So I would say, one, being systematic is of primal importance, and two, I think we need a little tact, right? When it comes to being a little street smart is important. When it comes to managing stakeholders, I think that's a great skill to have, because you can have the best project plan there is, but if you don't know how to talk to your teammates, if you don't know how to talk to your boss, if you can't handle a customer with a little bit of tact, then I think you're doomed as a project manager, right? You're just a planner, you're not a manager then, right? So I think being systematic and actually having tact is what makes a big difference. All right, any more questions, you can just drop it, I'll answer them. But in the meantime, I'd just like to request the moderators to drop the next link on here. Don't worry, it's not a quiz. You're all done testing and all of you have done really well. So great job on that. But right now, I would love to hear some feedback from you. And this is a form that does just that. It just takes feedback. So don't worry, it's not a test. It's not a quiz. So just fill this up. And that's pretty much it from my end. And I've honestly had so much fun today making this slide deck, talking to you guys, working with the absolutely brilliant folks at Peso Innovation Lab. So thank you everyone for attending. It's been an absolute joy talking to you, and I hope this last hour and a half that you spent with me was actually worthwhile, and I hope you take something today that actually makes a tangible difference in your own careers. And I hope you had fun, right? Thank you. Thanks everyone.